Something that's been troubling me for a few years now is this disconnect that I see between game developers and game academics. It seems like game devs are off in their own world, discussing and exchanging practical knowledge. And then game academics are off in the ivory tower asking esoteric questions about the nature of play and identity and simulation. There is definitely some cross-pollination, and you can see this pretty clearly in places like GDC, but as a whole, I think as a games community, we could do a whole lot better about sharing our knowledge and our perspectives with each other. I've shockingly met game professors who have admitted to me that they do not play games, but I've also met game devs who are unfamiliar with some of the most basic and fundamental game studies concepts too. The reason this is so concerning to me is because there is a truly profound amount of knowledge that can be shared between game academics and those creating games. And as someone who both makes games and studies them academically, I know firsthand the value that can come from engaging with both theory and practice. Understanding theory has made my design work better, and making games has brought a tangible perspective to the theory that makes it more directly useful for me. It's a lovely little cycle. So I want us, as a games community, to bridge this gap. If you're a games academic, try your hand at making a game or play them if you don't already. To me, this seems straightforward enough to solve. Either buy some games or download the free version of a game engine and just start poking around and see what happens. What's less straightforward to solve is getting game developers to engage with more theory, because I recognize that there are concrete barriers to that. A lot of academic papers are locked behind paywalls unless you're a student or a faculty member. Game texts can be very expensive, and even if you do manage to get a hold of them, it's time-consuming to sift through hundreds of pages looking for a few nuggets of helpful information. Not everything is relevant or useful, and you could waste your time on something that's mostly trash. Beyond game academics and developers, I also think it's important for everyone who plays games to have a vocabulary with which they can critically examine them. A lot of us under the age of 50 say that we play video games frequently. And while most of us learn basic media literacy concepts in either high school or university, these concepts are often specific to TV or film or literature, and our education rarely touches on video games. It's empowering to all of us as players to be able to explain in a detailed and informed manner why a video game was bad or why it was good. And this is one of the many reasons in my mind why it's important for all of us players to gain some degree of video game media literacy. And so, as your friendly neighborhood game studies professor, I want to be a resource for all the curious game developers and players of the world. I'll find and summarize theory about games so you don't have to. And what better place to start than with the text many game scholars consider to be the start of modern game studies. Homo Ludens, a study of the play element of culture. In 1938, a Dutch historian named Johan Huizinga published a book called Homo Ludens, a study of the play element of culture. Homo means man in Latin, and ludo means play, so Homo Ludens essentially means the playing human. While biologists, psychologists, and philosophers had been asking what the function of play was for millennia, Huizinga had a different goal in mind. On the very first page of his book, Huizinga states that play is one of the foundations of human civilization, and he spends the rest of his book arguing in support of this claim. This was a different approach than scholars had taken before, and this is why many game scholars today consider Huizinga to be the father of modern game studies. In Homo Ludens, Huizinga positions play as an essential part of creating and shaping parts of our culture, from war to politics to poetry. It would follow then that play is older than culture itself, and that all play, therefore, could be imbued with meaning. I think this is a fascinating concept to consider if you're a game developer, because when you make games, you are, in fact, creating and shaping human culture. And when a player engages with your work, they are co-creating that meaning with you. If that sounds like a huge responsibility, it's because it is. I think this is why it is so critical for game developers to be familiar with at least some of the basics of game studies. Nature and significance of play as a cultural phenomenon. In his first chapter, Huizinga very briefly summarizes what biology, psychology, and philosophy have to say about why we play. These were the fields that had touched on play before, and he uses their lessons to provide context for his arguments. I think these approaches are interesting and worthwhile to cover, so let's explore them quickly as well. Here's what biologists, psychologists, and philosophers had to say about play circa 1938. One theory shared by both biology and psychology says that playfulness is an instinct that all animals share, including us. We play to practice skills that we need for survival. A kitten plays with a toy so it can hone its hunting skills for adulthood, and a child plays house to prepare for a life full of domestic responsibilities as an adult. While there are scholars critical of this theory today, at least in regards to animals, we do know that when it comes to humans specifically, playing video games can help you practice skills that are then relevant even into adulthood. For example, surgeons who play video games at least 3 hours a week made 42% fewer errors and performed 27% faster than their non-playing colleagues. In this case, playing video games helped them understand screen interfaces better and improved their hand-eye coordination. So when you make video games and you ask players to repeat certain actions and overcome certain obstacles or challenges, you are, in effect, teaching them something, a skill, and then asking them to hone that skill as they continue playing. And sometimes what you teach them is useful even outside of playful situations. Playing to practice skills is only one potential reason behind why we play, though. There are other theories that Huizinga explores. Another theory from biology claims that we play to practice restraint, so that we learn our strength and we don't accidentally sock our sibling too hard. Yet another theory says we play to satisfy our desire to dominate and compete, to show others who's best. Or perhaps we play because of our instinct to imitate our elders. Some psychologists have argued we play to relax, while still others say we play to release extra energy that has no other place to go. Play has also been suggested as an outlet for harmful impulses like violence or aggression, and on the opposite end, as a method of socially bonding with others. Finally, Huizinga adds, play can be presented as a method of wish fulfillment, so we can pretend we are a knight or a superhero, a theory posited by Freud and Aristotle both. Huizinga then rightfully points out that all of these theories assume the reason behind why we play is due to some underlying biological drive or function. What each of these theories fails to account for, then, is that we also play because it's fun. You could make the argument that we've evolved to enjoy something that's beneficial to us, but I actually don't think that takes the whole picture into account. What about those times when you're so lost in a game, you don't even notice that hours have gone by and you've unintentionally deprived yourself of sleep? Or when a game of Monopoly ends in a flipped board and a family fight, or in other words, the weakening of a social bond? Or when you gamble away all your earthly possessions or injure yourself. Sometimes play is the very opposite of what is evolutionarily advantageous for us. So whether or not play serves some kind of biological or psychological function here is kind of a moot point, because there's obviously something else going on here. We need to instead ask how and why playing is fun, which is exactly what Huizinga does.
What actually is the fun of playing? Why does the baby crow with pleasure? Why does the gambler lose themselves in their passion? Why is a huge crowd roused to frenzy by a football match? This intensity of and absorption in play finds no explanation in biological analysis. Yet in this intensity, this absorption, this power of maddening lies the very essence, the primordial quality of play. Nature, so our reasoning mind tells us, could just as easily have given her children all those useful functions of discharging superabundant energy, of relaxing after exertion, of training for the demands of life, of compensating unfulfilled longings, etc., in the form of purely mechanical exercises and reactions. But no, she gave us play, with its tension, its mirth, and its fun. The fun of playing resists all analysis, all logical interpretation.
So why is it that we play when we could easily practice skills we need or learn our strength through other means? Even though Huizinga asks all the right questions about the fun of playing, unfortunately, he kind of dances around answering them and never really gives a straightforward response. Plenty of game scholars and game developers have tried to answer this question with varying degrees of success, which we will be exploring throughout the rest of the series. But that is a gigantic can of worms to open, and we're here today to talk about Homo Ludens, so let's just continue with this. To finish up his first chapter, Huizinga describes what he believes to be the 5 characteristics of play. The first characteristic of play is that it must be voluntary. If you are forced to play, it isn't play. One must have the freedom and the willingness to play. In fact, Huizinga goes so far as to suggest that freedom is play, which, okay, sure, I guess. The second characteristic of play is that it isn't ordinary or real life. Play is pretend. Huizinga warns against using this as an excuse to not take play seriously, however. He believes play to be very serious business indeed. He writes,
Play may rise to heights of beauty and sublimity that leave seriousness far beneath. Play adorns life, amplifies it.
The third characteristic of play is that it has tension, it has challenges, it has rules that must create order. In Huizinga's own words,
these rules are a very important factor. All play has its rules. They determine what holds in the temporary world circumscribed by play. The rules of a game are absolutely binding and allow no doubt.
The rules of play then work to create order from chaos. The fourth characteristic of play is that no profit can be gained from it. Huizinga feels very strongly that play is not an activity that can have any material interest connected to it. I feel a little funny about this one, considering I both buy games to play and make them. In our modern world, play, work, and profit have a much closer relationship than I think Huizinga could have probably ever imagined. I don't agree with him on this one, and I'm not alone. Other scholars have criticized him for this characteristic as well. The fifth and final characteristic of play is that it has a specific locality and duration. In other words, play requires a playground, as well as a clear start and end. Huizinga describes here how play has a repetitious quality. In the design world, we call this the game's core gameplay loop, although of course Huizinga doesn't use this language. And in most games, the start and the stop are the game's win or lose conditions. Play also requires a locality, a playground, where the play can occur, either literally or in our minds. In this space, the rules of the game apply, not those of the real world. Huizinga writes,
the arena, the card table, the magic circle, the temple, the stage, the screen, the tennis court, the court of justice, are all in form and function playgrounds. Forbidden spots, isolated, hedged round, hallowed, within which special rules obtain. All are temporary worlds within the ordinary world, dedicated to the performance of an act apart.
Here we have arrived at Huizinga's biggest claim to fame, the concept of the magic circle. Just that passing phrase, which you may not have caught and which is rarely mentioned throughout the rest of his book, is often considered to be Huizinga's most notable contribution to game studies. But the concept of the magic circle as it exists today wasn't really a thing until 2004, when two game designers, Eric Zimmerman and Katie Salen, took inspiration from Huizinga's work and formalized the idea themselves in their book, Rules of Play. The magic circle is a foundational game studies concept with a rich history, and it is rife with intriguing discourse. So we'll be taking a closer look at it in the next video in this series. But in the context Huizinga was using it, the magic circle was just another playground. It was a ritual space. This is because in Huizinga's mind, ritual is play, and play is ritual. He talks at length about this. For him, the key element was that both require the use of a closed space, the marking of a sacred spot. He writes,
"Formally speaking, there is no distinction whatever between marking out a space for a sacred purpose and marking it out for purposes of sheer play."
Huizinga doesn't expand on the magic circle any more than what we've just already talked about. And in my opinion, propping up the magic circle as the most notable contribution that he made to game studies detracts from some of the really interesting ideas he develops about play throughout the rest of Homo Ludens, especially since the magic circle as a concept as it exists now wasn't even his to begin with. So what are Huizinga's other interesting points that he uses to support his idea that play is essential to the formation of human culture? Well, he makes his readers wait a little bit because he takes a bit of a detour in his second chapter. The play concept as expressed in language. In this chapter, Huizinga dissects the word play and its history in different linguistic traditions. And although linguistics is a fascinating lens through which to explore many things, Huizinga, in my opinion, doesn't make any particularly interesting remarks here, so we're just gonna skip on by to chapter 3. Play and contest as civilizing functions. In his third chapter, Huizinga begins to set up his argument in favor of his original hypothesis, that play is central to the development of human culture and civilization. He states that war, law, philosophy, music, dance, festivals, poetry, and folklore all arise out of play. As to why this isn't immediately obvious to all of us, he also claims that as societies become more structured, the characteristics of play present in our culture sort of fade away into the background. In our modern world, the connection between the characteristics of play and our culture has become almost completely obscured, except to a careful observer. The majority of this chapter, though, focuses on the competitive nature of many types of play and how that influences and shapes our culture. Huizinga hypothesizes that playful competitions and games give us a framework through which we can satisfy the innate human desire to feel valued, capable, and potentially even superior to others. Competitions, contests, and wars then give us a way to stroke our own egos, to pursue glory and virtue. Huizinga explains that from sports matches to gambling,
the player wins at something more than the game. They have won esteem, obtained honour, and this honour and esteem at once accrue to the benefit of the group to which the victor belongs. Success won readily passes from the individual to the group.
So if you win, your friends also win just because of their association with you. Winning a game means winning not only glory and honor for yourself, but for your pals too. Success at contests and games can give an individual, and the groups they belong to by extension, enough honor to rise to the status of power, fame, or nobility. Just think about Olympians, chess masters, and esports players. The names of people who are good at games, especially sports, can end up becoming household names. They do get a certain level of status even still in our modern societies. I also think that Huizinga is correct in stating that competitions, whether of wit or of steel, are excellent ways to establish or restore honor. They were thousands of years ago, and they still are today. If you're making a multiplayer game, it might be worthwhile to lean into providing players with some kind of symbolic representation of their success they can put on display for others, whether that's a ranking system or a title. Having bragging rights can be really good fun. I do want to point out that play isn't just about fracturing groups and potentially creating social stratification. It's also about bringing people together. Huizinga doesn't touch on this as much as I think he should have, but to his credit, he does give examples from ancient Chinese and Greek cultures where different groups would come together at specific times of the year to participate in games and festivals with each other. Huizinga claims that this ritualized, repeated connection between different tribes through the framework of seasonal contests lies in the domain of playfulness and ultimately helped work toward creating a more structured government later on in each civilization's development. That's about it for Chapter 3. Having taken some time exploring the competitive nature of play and its importance to the formation of civilizational elements like hierarchies and governments, Huizinga then proceeds to spend the next 7 chapters, the main bulk of Homo Ludens, explaining how the 5 characteristics of play manifest in different spheres of our culture. We will touch on most of these spheres, but not in the We will touch on most of these spheres, but not in the order that Huizinga does. We'll be mixing up the chapters a bit and skipping over some others. But now, let us start with the most intense, the playful elements of war. Play and war.
Ever since words existed for fighting and playing, people have been wont to call war a game.
This is how Huizinga opens his chapter on play and war. Now you might be thinking, how on earth is a tragedy like war playful? And to that I say, fair question. Before we go much further, I think it's important to note that Huizinga is explicitly talking about a specific kind of war and conflict, one in which the contest is between equals who recognize each other's humanity. Both parties must follow the rules as to what constitutes acceptable violence. In Homo Ludens, Huizinga dismisses almost all modern wars as being dehumanizing and thus not playful. Huizinga doesn't consider wars waged for economic expansion or for genocide as belonging to the play sphere. In fact, he was so openly anti-war and anti-fascist that he spent time in a Nazi internment camp because of his anti-war views. So when Huizinga discusses the playfulness of war, he is talking almost exclusively about ancient war, rejecting modern tactics of machinery, chemical warfare, and guns because they do not belong to play. In his eyes, only ancient war was honorable. Supposedly, this was a time when no one was fighting dirty, and if they did, they would break the rules and dispel the playful elements of war. I guess. I'm sure ancient war also sucked. All that said, Huizinga wastes no time in outlining the playful aspects of ancient war. To start, many battles had a predetermined time and place. Medieval Europe, it was common for kings to send each other letters announcing the time and place where they were to go to battle, much like you might send an invite to a friend asking them to play video games with you. So, like play, war has a start and an end. It also requires a space, a battleground, or an arena, a playground. The second shared characteristic between war, contest, and play are rules. In ancient Greece, sometimes certain weapons would be banned from use in war. For example, during the battle between the city of Chalcis and Eretria, all projectile weapons were banned. This was a rule for this war. Huizinga also gives the example of ancient China, where civilities were often exchanged between two warring parties the night before the battle. The generals would come together to drink wine and reminisce about more peaceful times. They'd even proudly boast about their enemies' achievements in high esteem. There was an understanding here that the violence was only a duty to enact in a separate time and place away from the real world, and that the hostility shouldn't carry over. whatever feelings they might have during battle, it was important to keep these separate from the feelings that they had when they weren't on the battleground. Here is another element war shares with play. Both take place in a suspended reality, belonging to the realm of pretend, and separate from the real world. The fact these conflicts existed in a third space allowed for the possibility of friendships between these Chinese generals in the real world. We can also take the example of single combat, when two leaders fight each other to determine the winner of a battle, rather than making their whole armies fight. In these single combats, it's been a pretty common practice throughout history for each fighter to decide on what weapons they want to use before the fight begins and which weapons they want to ban. Next, a dueling space must be marked out. This serves as their playground, as the place set apart from reality. Finally, there's a third party, a referee of sorts, who proclaims when the fight begins and ends. Sometimes it's a fight to the death, and sometimes the first to draw blood is the winner. Huizinga claims that this tradition of single combat wasn't because these kings were humanitarians who cared about the lives of their armies. He says that single combat was used because it was simply just a satisfactory substitute for larger scale warfare.
Being essentially a play form, the duel is symbolical. It is the shedding of blood, and not the killing, that matters.
The duel is symbolical. It is pretend, and so therefore playful. Sometimes, too, people would choose a champion to duel for them, who would represent them in the battle. Selecting a champion to represent you and fight for you brings modern-day fighting games to mind. The single combat duel has existed in our culture and in the play sphere for millennia. Modern war games directly mimic elements from archaic war, from 4X strategy games like the Total War franchise to first-person shooters like the Call of Duty series. They follow rules, possess an element of fantasy, have a formal stop and start time or win and lose condition, and take place in a space set apart from the real world. Although almost all games loosely simulate reality to some extent, depictions of war in games are often direct simulations of reality. For example, in Age of Empires 2, you can relive the conquests of Genghis Khan or Joan of Arc. In America's Army, the rules for the game are pulled straight from the rules of the US military. I think the reason why games simulate war so closely is because archaic war, at least, as Huizinga points out, can be very playful. So it's easy to take war and translate it directly to a playful medium like video games. All of this begs the question, if you're a game developer who wants to represent war or other violent conflicts in a playful way, how are you going to frame these conflicts to your player? To what extent will you include realism, such as blood and gore? Why are you asking the player to engage in warfare as opposed to something else? What will you deem as acceptable versus unacceptable violence through the actions that you reward and punish? This really is up to you. Players can only engage in the behaviors that you allow. I don't think it's a bad idea to use Huizinga's line as a starting point and ask yourself if making players wage wars for economic expansion or for genocide is really all that playful or fun. Understanding the playful elements present in real warfare can give you a fresh perspective on designing and playing war games. What are some of the other playful elements present in war, like the bonding of opposing warriors before a battle that aren't usually depicted in video games? How might you as a designer or a developer incorporate some of these more unlikely elements of play and war into your game to increase the playful spirit of the conflict you're asking your players to engage with? Similarly, if you're a player, it's useful to ask yourself, why might the game designers have positioned war and violence the way they did? What are they saying about war and violence through their portrayal? As one final note before we move on, Huizinga does not talk about war being voluntary, so I guess it's maybe not playful in that aspect. Which makes sense. I think it's rare for people to willingly put their lives on the line in such a potentially horrifying way. But let's just continue on to the next cultural sphere touched by play. Play and law. The courtroom is the playground of law. Its physical bounds create a space where the rules of the real world are suspended and new rules apply. Inside, everyone has a role to play that's different from their role in normal life. They are judge, jury, attorney, witness, defendant, victim, or arbiter. There's a beginning and an end to the trial, maybe a recess in the middle, but there is a distinct time and place where it occurs. Special attire is usually worn for this ritual. Specific rules determine how the trial takes place, like who gets to speak and when. And when this game is over, there are winners and losers, as with any other kind of contest. As everyone walks out of the courtroom, the spell is broken and everyone returns to the real world. Maybe the attorneys shake hands now that the trial is over. Maybe there's a mutual understanding that what happens in the courtroom stays in the courtroom. It's separate from reality, so it's separate from the friendship that they might share outside of court, just like those ancient Chinese generals. Law contains many playful elements, but once again, Huizinga notably doesn't connect the playfulness in law to being free or voluntary. A lot of the time, being present for a court case isn't voluntary. At least in the United States, serving as a juror is mandated by law. You just gotta do it. Huizinga then makes the connection between the playfulness of law and the playfulness of politics, giving the example of the British political system.
Debates in the House of Commons have been conducted very largely according to the rules of a game, and in the true play spirit. Personal rivalries are always at work, keeping up a continual match between the players, whose object is to checkmate one another, but without prejudice to the interests of the country which they serve with all seriousness. The spirit of fellowship would allow the bitterest opponents a friendly chat even after the most virulent debate.
The playground qualities of a parliament or a senate allow for heated debates about important topics, but with the shared understanding that when the verbal contest is over, everyone returns to the real world. Since the debate happened with a playful spirit, it spares any real-world friendships from negative effects. It's clear that the remnants of play are present still in both law and politics, but I think it's worthwhile to note that the boundary between play and the real isn't as strong of a line as it used to be. Huizinga himself mentions this multiple times throughout his book. So what does the relationship between law, politics, and play mean for game developers? I think it's important to recognize that the way players treat each other outside of your game can impact the way they treat each other inside of your game. You want to make sure that you're facilitating positive interactions and feelings between players even when they aren't in direct competition with one another. For example, if you're making a competitive online game that has a lobby, how can players communicate with each other there, if at all? Is your lobby a place where the spirit of competition is still at the forefront? Or is it a place where players can come together in the spirit of camaraderie, a place where they can share the love of the game? As we know, play isn't just about competition. Playing also helps us feel connected to one another. It encourages empathy in individuals and unification within a community. It is important to recognize that there will be a community that forms around your game because bonding and community is a natural result of play. Knowing this can help you prepare the foundation for your game's community and ensure that it's a welcoming and safe one for your players. It's never enough to just design a game and release it into the world, especially if your game involves players interacting with each other. The success of your game also relies on active community management so that you can help guide the way players communicate with each other even outside the bounds of your game. How are your fan wikis and forums going to be moderated and managed, for example? That said, it's your responsibility as a developer to create a space, yet another playground, where these conversations can happen safely and productively. You don't want a player to be turned off from your game entirely just because of an argument they had with another impassioned player. All in all, just like lawyers shaking hands after a vicious trial, you want players to be able to step away after a game without a bad taste in their mouth. If you're a solo dev, consider learning a thing or two about community management. And if you're part of a larger team, either advocate for hiring a community manager or give your current one a big thank you for their very important work. And if you're a player, chances are there are communities around the games that you love. Realize that you're a part of this community too. How do you want to be treated within this space? How can your experiences be supported by the game devs? Let them know. So that's play in law and play in politics. Onward now to the next cultural sphere of play. Play forms in art. Play and many art forms are closely entwined. I think this is even more apparent in the modern day, considering video games are a wonderful combination of many art forms. Writing, music, film, acting, poetry, fashion, sculpture, architecture, set design, animation, drawing, cooking, crafting, blacksmithing. The list literally never ends. Of all the art forms, Huizinga focuses a lot on the playful elements of music.
Play, we said, lies outside the reasonableness of practical life, has nothing to do with necessity or utility, duty or truth. All this is equally true of music.
Playing music is exactly that, playing. Interestingly, many unrelated languages refer to the manipulation of an instrument as playing. In almost all of the world's languages, you play the piano, play the guitar, or play the drums. It seems that playing music is so closely related to the human idea of playing that we've all just decided that this is a good word to use for the activity. When music is performed, whether for an audience or just for yourself, it contains the elements of play. Huizinga claims that in order for an art to have playful qualities, it needs to be performed. This is because he believes play requires action. I have issues with this statement, but those aside, I think it would have been more accurate for him to say that play requires interaction. For example, in the performing arts, those interactions usually extend between the performer and the audience and between performers. Theater, music, poetry, and dance all contain the elements of play when performed. They are done willingly. They have a start and an end. There are rules, like the audience shouldn't jump up on stage unless asked, or in Western music, that major chords sound happy and minor chords sound sad. The audience claps when the performance is done, and the performers take a bow. A playground is set aside in the performing arts. A concert hall, a stage, even a living room can create a space for play. And in these spaces, we take on new roles. We're a musician, comedian, or member of the audience. Sometimes we take our new roles quite literally, like when actors play a part totally different from their own identity in the real world. Where things get a little murky is when profit gets involved. People certainly perform all the time just for the fun of it, for the playing of it without any capital gain. But there are artists out there who have built financially successful careers around their performance art. Does the fact that it's done for profit remove some of the playfulness of the activity? Huizinga would certainly think so, but I don't know if it matters. It's important to understand that games, too, are playful performances. They require some level of interaction from your player. Even if there isn't an audience watching, you're still asking them to perform some level of skill, even if it's just a mouse click. Knowing when you're asking for more of a performance from your player and when you're asking for less can help you pace your game well. Pacing well in games relies on finding a good balance between variety and repetition, between intensity and calm. It's like a roller coaster. Thinking in terms of how much you are asking the player to perform can cue you into understanding the degree of intensity a certain moment embodies. And then, of course, there are those who are in fact playing a game partially because they are performing for an audience. Perhaps your player is enjoying your game while their partner or sibling watches. Perhaps they're a Twitch streamer performing for an audience of hundreds or thousands or maybe even millions. In these cases, your game creates interaction not only between itself and your player, but also between the player and their audience. Knowing that there's 3 points of interaction potentially occurring can help you approach the design of your game in a new way. Take some time to think about what makes a game enjoyable to watch in addition to what makes a game enjoyable to play. How can you incorporate the playful elements of performance into your game? That's all for play and art. Let's talk about our final play sphere. Play and poetry and elements of Mythopoiesis. And now, having saved the best for last, I want to talk about what I think personally is the most interesting contribution Huizinga made to game studies. It's the relationship between play, poetry, metaphor, and immersion. Here's how Huizinga begins this discussion.
To understand poetry, we must be capable of donning the child's soul like a magic cloak, and of forsaking the adult's wisdom for the child's. Poetry proceeds within the playground of the mind, in a world of its own which the mind creates for it. There, things have a very different nature from the one they wear in ordinary life, and are bound by ties other than those of logic.
Huizinga believes that there's a place each of us can visit in our own minds where we play with ideas. It's a place where lightning doesn't have to just be lightning. It can be the wrath of Zeus. It's a place where metaphor prevails, so that a tree has the potential to be something other than just a biological organism that photosynthesizes. In the playground of our imaginative minds, those tree roots can delve deep into the earth and the branches can reach into the sky, and suddenly the tree becomes the whole world. It's not just any normal tree, it's the tree of life. It's a representation, a metaphor for the interconnectedness of the whole universe. This is poetry, it's metaphor. We know that one of the characteristics of play is our ability to just pretend, to suspend disbelief. And our ability to playfully pretend is part of the reason why we can write and enjoy poetry. Huizinga believes that for this reason, poetry is a very playful thing.
To call poetry a playing with words and language is no metaphor. It is the precise and literal truth. What poetic language does with images is to play with them. It disposes them in style. It instills mystery into them, so that every image contains the answer to an enigma.
Understood in this way, poetry is quite literally playing with words. We create a playground around anything we make into a metaphor. Like, all of us know that a tree isn't the literal interconnectedness of things. It's a concrete object, but one which our playful minds can use to represent other things. Similarly, when I call my partner sweetheart, I know they're not an actual sweet heart. It's just a metaphor. I'm playing with words to represent other ideas. So when we step into the playful spaces of our mind, we suspend reality. We engage with metaphor. It's why an actor can slip into the identity of the character they're playing, or why a player can slip into the identity of their avatar in a video game. The person we're playing both is and isn't us. They're a projection of us, a metaphor for us. A specific type of metaphor that we humans seem to really enjoy is personification, which is when we give animals, objects, or ideas human qualities. Huizinga says that personification
is both a play function and a supremely important habit of the mind.
We've been personifying things since the beginning of time, when myths and heroes ruled. Chaos, war, sunlight, fertility, love, even death become personified as gods and goddesses. We do it to animals too. A fox is a trickster, an owl is a wise sage. We personified our world thousands of years ago, creating many canons of myths and legends. We personify our world today on a daily basis, all of us. It's a very human habit.
Which of us has not repeatedly caught ourselves addressing some lifeless object in deadly earnest, attributing to it a perverse will, reproaching it and abusing it for its demoniacal obstinacy? If ever you did this, you were personifying the object in the strict sense of the word. Yet, you do not normally avow your belief in the object as an entity or idea. You are only falling involuntarily into the play attitude.
We all indulge our play attitude when we personify. It's a near universal experience, I think. We talk to our pets. We pretend our computers have minds of their own. We give our cars names and personalities. Personification is something we all do in some form or another. On a small scale, we curse lifeless objects in our house, and on a larger scale, we create elaborate myths, gods, and religions. Huizinga doubts that people genuinely believe in these gods, whether ancient or modern. He thinks it's all playful.
Holiness and play always tend to overlap. So do poetic imagination and faith. It is impossible, in my view, to make any sharp distinction between poetic personification in allegory and the conception of celestial, or infernal, beings in theology.
I'm not sure that I agree with him. I think it's a little more nuanced than that. But I do think it's a testament to the power of play that we can view these personifications as real, whether it's an ancient Greek god or the Judeo-Christian god. And I do not mean to reduce the importance or seriousness of religious worship with this statement at all, but rather to elevate the status of play. Finally, on this topic, Huizinga writes,
If this innate tendency of the mind which invests the objects of ordinary life with personality is in fact rooted in play, then we are confronted with a very serious issue. The play attitude must have been present before human culture or human speech existed. Hence the ground on which personification and imagination work is a datum from the remotest past onward.
Huizinga concludes by suggesting that one of the most essential, fundamental qualities of being human is being playful, and I fully agree with him. I think the connections between imagination, metaphor, and play cannot be untangled. They are the same thing. Our human ability to play, to just pretend, lets us know that sometimes a tree isn't just a tree, but something much, much more. It lets us be gods, heroes, animals, even bread, if only for a little while. Huizinga's idea of play as pretend is closely connected to the concept of immersion, which I think we can all agree is an enjoyable aspect of playing games. Immersion, then, understood within the context of Homo Ludens, describes those moments when you're playing pretend so well you're fully transported to another reality. If you're making games, it can be helpful to ask yourself, how are you going to immerse your player? In what ways are you asking them to suspend disbelief? What new identity are you asking them to construct? And in what ways might this new identity construction bring delight? And in what ways might it bring painful dissonance? If you, as a developer, accept the human mind as innately playful, you can approach immersion from this new perspective. Rather than opting to give your player the best graphics possible and just leaving it at that, consider instead how your game can spark your player's natural inclination for playing pretend, because that's what truly beautiful immersion looks like. When your player feels empowered by the game environment and encouraged by the mechanics to indulge their own internal sense of fantasy. This is why giving the player the best graphics in the world or simply putting a game in VR doesn't actually influence the player's sense of immersion as much as you might initially think. For example, I've recently been playing V Rising with a friend. My laptop was making real scary noises, so I turned the graphics quality all the way down. But it doesn't really matter because I feel so immersed in the game because of what I'm doing. Everything I'm doing makes me feel like I'm a vampire.
I have to avoid sunlight, drink blood regularly to avoid dying, and I can't pass through water. All support my ideas of what it means to play pretend as a vampire.
If you're a player and you've ever wondered why a game feels like it should be fun, but it isn't, it may be that you don't feel inspired to play pretend, which causes a lack of immersion. The game's environment and or the actions you take within it don't align with what your idea of playing pretend should be like within this space or identity. Of course, everyone has different ideas as to what playing pretend should be like, and this is a good thing. This is part of the reason why a game can resonate deeply with one person and not with another. We all have our own tastes with how we like to play pretend in our imaginations. Ultimately, if you're a player and you're wondering why a game is or isn't fun, ask yourself if you feel immersed. Can you play pretend how you like to? So, to wrap up, play and metaphor, especially personification, are closely entwined with play and share many of its characteristics. Both poetry and metaphor mean getting lost in your imagination and pretending things aren't quite what they seem. They all have a start and a stop because we can't pretend forever. They occur in a space, on the page, or in our minds. To exist in your imagination is voluntary, just like play. Poetry and play both have tension and rules. As far as not making a profit, well, there are people who make their living as poets, and there were when Huizinga was alive. So once again, I really don't know why Huizinga included this as a characteristic of play, but anyway. We'll continue developing these ideas during our next video on the Magic Circle. For now, though, let's summarize Huizinga's main points and finish up with Homo Ludens. Johan Huizinga is considered by many to be the father of modern game studies because he took a new approach to studying games in Homo Ludens, which was unlike anything that had come before. Rather than asking what the function of play was, he examined the qualities of play and argued that human civilization and culture arise out of play. Homo Ludens begins by outlining the 5 characteristics of play. First, that play must be voluntary and free. Second, that play is pretend. It isn't ordinary or real life. Third, play is tension, challenges, and rules that create order. Fourth, that no profit can be obtained from play. Finally, play requires a playground, as well as a clear start and stop. After exploring the competitive nature of play and its civilizing functions in his 3rd chapter, Huizinga spends much of the rest of his book exploring the presence of each of these characteristics of play in different spheres of our culture, from war to music. All in all, while I don't agree with everything Huizinga says in Homo Ludens, I do think there's a lot he discusses that brings up important concepts that game developers and players should consider thinking about, like immersion or depictions of war, or what makes a game fun to watch as well as play. And while Huizinga is associated with the Magic Circle, I hope that after this video you can agree that there is a lot more we can learn from him than just that. So thank you for watching.
Big thank you to my friend Alan for voicing Huizinga in this video and for his feedback on an earlier version of this script. Thank you also to my friend Emma for giving feedback on this script many years ago. Thank you Jake, Will, and Levi for helping me get game footage. Thank you to Amy and Taylor, who kindly let me use some of their art. And finally, thank you to my friend Bastello Music, who wrote some original music for this video, which you are listening to right now. He was incredible to work with and makes some seriously stellar beats, so go check out his other stuff. We didn't discuss chapters 6 or 9 in this video, which covered the relationship between play and knowing and play forms in philosophy. In these chapters, Huizinga focused on how riddle games gave rise to the Socratic method and the playful elements of the Sophists. However, in my opinion, these were the weakest chapters of Homo Ludens, and there isn't much useful information to glean from them, either as a developer or a player. If you want to dive a little deeper into Homo Ludens, I recommend reading chapters 1 and 3. If you'd like to see the essay version of this video with references and where I obtained my extra footage and photos, you can find links to these documents in the description. Thanks again for watching.